So Jason Wrich from Crawford, Colorado. How are you this morning?
Oh man, the sun's shining, the birds are chirping. We got about an inch of snow over the last couple of days. So that's the first moisture we've had in weeks. So I'm doing pretty darn good. How are you doing?
Dry. Like you, we just got a little bit of snow. We were supposed to get like 4 to 6 inches. It turned out to be maybe an inch, which was a little disappointing, but I didn't mind not having to go out and bust drifts because the way the weather forecast was looking, if we would have got like 4 to 6 inches of snow, I would have had some pretty serious drifts to get through to get to my cows. But take what you can get. It's awful dry here. We're behind, and everybody's heard me complain about how freaking dry it is for the last couple of months. So we're not gonna get back into that today.
Yeah, and we're in an unprecedented series of droughts in written history of this area that we're in, which is one of those things that really makes you think about what are we doing and why are we doing it. So we'll probably get more into that later on. But yeah, it's super dry, has been for years here. We rely on snowpack for irrigation water, and it's always in the back of my mind.
But you're on the water district or water board as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm on our irrigation water board of directors for Fruitland Irrigation Water, and then I'm also on the board of directors for both of the domestic water companies that provide domestic water to these mesas that we live on. And so that's one of those things where water is the lifeblood. I know out there you guys have, shallow wells. We call shallow wells because we hit water 300 plus feet. And it's very expensive to drill and pump and all of that. And for stock water, where in the winter, we rely on domestic water to water our stock. And so if you don't have it and you don't have good delivery, that really changes the dynamics of everything.
And that could probably get kind of expensive, can it?
It Yeah, yes and no. I mean, so most of our domestic water is metered through a dole. So you have a rubber orifice essentially that delivers a quart a minute, and then it goes into a cistern. And so the more capacity you have of storage, the more safety you have essentially there. And so yes, it is expensive, but compared to the people that haul water from town, it's pretty cheap.
I Every time I see somebody hauling water to cows, all I see is dollar signs. Dad always told me that was a real easy way to go broke or to spend a lot of money in a big hurry, was to haul water to your cows. I think in 14 years I've been lucky enough. I've only had one water system failure that I had to haul water, and it was only about 4,000 gallons, and I just had to go dump that in a storage tank. So that wasn't that bad. I can't imagine, hauling 4 or 5 thousand gallons of water a day to cows that are standing in a pasture that doesn't have installed plumbing. That's just a completely foreign concept to me here.
Well, and that's so everybody that leases land from someone else that the landowner is not willing to or interested in sharing cost for water infrastructure, that's generally where they get into that position of hauling water, because hauling water is much cheaper than feed here in Western Colorado. And so that's where it's way cheaper to haul water to the cows than it is to try and put that feed up, especially like crop residue, and haul it back to the cows. And so those guys all pencil that out, dollars and cents. They don't have enough home place land mass. And with the cost of real estate doing what it is, the only way that you could start as a new farmer or rancher would be to inherit a place or win the lottery. Because I mean, there's properties out here selling for $16,000 an acre, and it is marginal pasture land at best. But you have city folks that just want to have a piece of dirt in the country, in the beautiful mountains and all of that, and they've got the money to spend. And so that's just the reality of ranching where we are here in Western Colorado.
And they think that $16,000 an acre is just an absolute screaming bargain price. And where I am, if you knock a zero off of that, that's still overpriced for range land around here. Farm ground goes for, goes for ridiculous amounts of money like it does everywhere. But range ground, there were several ranches that were on the market for many, many years that all of a sudden seemed like a year ago, everything that had been on the market for 5-6 years, all of a sudden moved and traded hands. And a lot of it traded hands for, $1,000, $1,200, $1,400 an acre. I mean, we're talking about good, big places, 5,000-6,000 acres, at least. I know 4 of them that moved within just a couple of months, beginning of last year. And that's not getting any better that's not better for anybody anywhere. I think everybody that's in the livestock industry or trying to raise crops is facing the same kind of cost scenario, that land prices are just spiraling upwards out of control. And like you said, it's, COVID has even driven a lot of that. It's driven a lot of urban exodus of people want to get out, get to smaller communities, like Crawford. How many people live in Crawford?
There's like 650 people in town.
So the community's probably double that.
Yeah.
Is
so
that
probably a little bit more? Because we have so many ranchettes, 20, 40, 60, 80 acre little subdivided, someone took 500 acres or 1,000 acres and split it into little ranchettes. For instance, when I first started dating my wife, because we live on her family's place, there were 4 houses from town to their ranch. And I counted yesterday, there's 56 houses from town to there. So that's from 1995 to today. And those are just the ones you can see from that road. If you get out on the rest of the county roads, there's even new county roads just to facilitate subdivisions, little 40s, little 20s here, there, and everywhere.
They keep closing county roads here.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, there's population density here is dropping, unlike, Colorado, where it seems to be rising. Our population density for the last 30, 40 years has done nothing but go down. So for a little bit of context on that, and I don't think I've shared this on the air, I actually live in the house that I was basically born in. I bought it about 12 years ago from the gentleman that owned it. And I have to commute out to the ranch. And housing, I forgot where I was going with that, but housing is, housing's very difficult to come by. And the last podcast I did, which should have come out last week, unless I did something weird with the release schedule. Lauren Poncho was talking about his ranch out in California, and he lives in town. He did not want to build a big house out on the ranch. He didn't want to put his value on the ranch. He didn't want to increase the value of the ranch by building a nice $1 million home. And we're talking like California. He's 40-45 minutes north of San Francisco. So you can imagine, like, real estate prices. I don't think either you or I have a cause to complain about real estate prices, in that perspective. But he made a great point that the house is an asset. Okay. And the ranch is an asset too, but building $1 million house on that ranch to live in doesn't necessarily increase the value of that ranch. It doesn't increase the value. It doesn't increase the productivity of the ranch. And if you ever want to sell that house, it's tied to the ranch. The house is on the ranch. So then what do you want to, then what are you going to do with it? So he had a great argument for, having your house separate from the ranch. And I thought that was really interesting. But so these ranchettes that are springing up, it's probably taking land that you can remember being in some sort of agricultural production, whether it was whether cattle or farmed, and now it's broken up into these small ranchettes. And let me guess, most of them have 1 or 2 horses, and a couple of them have a cow or 2.
Yeah, and actually, I would say probably less than 10% have a horse or 2. Most of them don't want to be tied down with livestock. And so it's like some of them are second and third homes. Some of them are retirees that just retired from the city and want to get out. And you see those ones turn over every 1 or 2 or 3 years. Every year you have a really good snowfall and a good watershed winter. They are completely at a loss on how to deal with the snow, and because we don't have professional snow removal, and and they built these big fancy houses just barely on the edge of code for snow load. So then you have to have someone come and shovel the roofs off and all of that stuff. And then you'll see them, they'll change hands. And then the realtor will find the next sucker, and they'll buy it, and deal with it again. Some of them, they come in and they put, $2.5 million houses on them. And it's like a show piece for their friends and family that come from wherever to say, hey, we're living the Western lifestyle. We have this mission style, super fancy house, and then you look at the personalities of those people oftentimes don't really jive with the local community. Just because, Farmer Joe down the road has been on this property since 1896, and somebody comes in, they don't have anything else to do. They get on all the board of directors for every single organization. They start, pushing their weight around, because they're used to getting their way because they have lots and lots and lots of money. And I've seen that happen a couple of times. I was actually recruited to be on quite a few of the boards that I'm on, because I kind of walk that knife's edge between the good old boys and a little bit of a different thinker and a problem solver, and to kind of mediate and also pull together those different kinds of personalities and priorities. So that's fun and exhausting sometimes. But yeah, I mean, and some of those 20s or 40s have a double wide trailer or a modular pre-manufactured home. It was like their dream to get out of the city, and they were able to buy those properties when they were still reasonably priced, which were still way cheaper than where they came from. And they're going to live there, they're going to die there, they're just happy to be there, get out of the city to live their sunset years, and those are the great people to work with. Those are the great landowners, because they don't really want to fix the fence. They don't want to see the grass go to waste. They can see once we bring the cows in and through and out how much better the ground looks. They love the feeling of supporting agriculture in their local communities. And so it's fun as well. It's just a lot of electric fence building.
So it sounds like you might have had some success getting, some of those little ranchettes leased to graze, I guess, to put your cows on it.
Yeah, and that's the thing with them, is most of them are just really happy to continue to get the tax break of it being in ag ground. It's easy for them to prove that when I'm on it, and the county assessor can call me and says, hey, these people say you have a lease with them. And so just the tax savings far outweighs what they would get in a lease payment. So oftentimes it's just for free. Keep the cows out of the petunias, and come in for however long you'll be here, and we'll call it even. So
that must be a very, very significant tax savings to work out like that.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, it's like 400%. So let's say your taxes are $670 for ag. I think it's 400% more than that if it's just residential land. So yeah.
Yeah, just a few acres and a trailer house. Yeah, come graze around that so I don't have to pay $10,000 in taxes. I get it. That makes total sense. So let's drag that rabbit back to the main trail here. I want to hear about Jason. Where did you come from? Where are you from?
Okay, so I was born and raised in Hotchkiss, Colorado, which is a little town just down the road from Crawford. Um, I lived in the only subdivision in Hotchkiss. That's where I grew up. So I was one of the few kids that lived in town. And I always wanted to have livestock. And so I had rabbits. I raised all different kinds of varieties of rabbits. I showed in 4-H and in FFA. That was my livestock enterprise. I'd butcher rabbits in the backyard and deliver them to all the little old ladies around that still ate rabbits. Um, and so that was my introduction to livestock agriculture. We also did fiber rabbits. We did show rabbits. We raised Dutch, which are a marked breed.
Fiber rabbits?
Yep. French and English Angoras. And so I would sell their wool to the spinners because it's super fine wool and you just comb it out, you card it out. And then we had meat rabbits, Californians, New Zealand's, sables. We had a little bit of everything.
Going back to your wool rabbits, like, is that, I know like rabbit felt is a thing. Is that actually profitable? Like, can a person make a profitable enterprise with raising rabbits for their pelts and meat?
For sure, all of the above. I mean, the conversion ratio between feed and productivity, not to mention the gestation period of rabbits and the number of offspring per litter. When we would go to compete in FFA for our ag business, I would blow the doors off of every single other enterprise, no matter what, maybe other than bake sales, as far as return on investment, initial investment, maintenance costs, feed, production. I mean, there is no other enterprise. Chickens started to come up just because they were getting such a big premium for their chickens, butchered chickens. But then you have to have a brooder, whereas my does would take care of my babies, right? They have the incubator in their belly, then they have them, they take care of them, feed them. Yeah, there is no livestock enterprise that I've ever been involved in that was as profitable as rabbits.
Okay, I get that. And it's been talked about that, like, generally your poultry are very profitable because they're an efficient converter of pounds of feed to pounds of meat. Pigs are kind of like on the next rung, and then sheep and goats are really good too. And then kind of at the other end of the scale, we've got cows. And we all love our cows, but let's be honest, it takes a hell of a lot of feed to put a pound of weight on a cow and compared to put the same amount of mass on a rabbit or on a chicken. I'm just kind of fascinated. Like, I've never heard of anybody raising rabbits to sell for their pelt. Like meat rabbits, that's a thing. Heard of that. But the whole rabbits to get their fur, that's a new one.
Well, and this was their wool. This was their hair, long Angora hair.
Right.
So it would go to people that would blend it in with other kinds of wool to make it softer. Because it's super fine, so it's not quite as strong. You have to have larger sizes of fibers, but they were doing it to do like hand spun lace when they were crocheting and knitting hand spun lace and stuff, because it's just that fine and it's that soft. And you don't have to kill those Angora rabbits, you simply comb them out. So animal husbandry and cleanliness has to be huge with them, because you get any soiling in it, then it devalues the hair very, very greatly. And a lot of that just came down to pen design to make sure that their little rabbit pellets manure could go all the way through. And then even their resting areas were small enough that they couldn't get comfortable on them and poop on them, that it would go past the side of that down through the bottom of the cage.
Okay, how exactly valuable is Angora rabbit wool?
I don't know what it is now, but it was by the ounce and it was hundreds of dollars per ounce. And so, and then the other thing too is you can breed in different colors. And so if you have undyed natural grays and smokes and pinks and, different colors, that's even more valuable. Champagnes and different colors.
Okay, now before anybody gets excited about $1,000 an ounce for Angora rabbit wool, how much wool would you generally get off of one rabbit?
Like 2 to 3 ounces per season, because it's super light and super fine.
Okay, if you'll send me over your old pen design, I'll go shop for rabbits this afternoon.
Yeah, and so but then that led me down a rabbit hole of chinchillas. Chinchillas were really big in the area. They were exporting all of their pelts to Asia, because that was where the market was. And so I started working at a chinchilla ranch in Crawford out here and was trading labor for breeding stock. And so we were raising and butchering and processing hides, and then also selling babies to the pet stores around for people that have to have pet chinchillas. And they're a completely different animal. They're an amazing ancient kind of animal that has their own way of doing things, and you either make them comfortable so they can do that, or they just won't do it. And that was fun. That was interesting. And I ended up getting rid of all of those when I joined the Marine Corps. Got rid of all the rabbits, got rid of all the chinchillas when I joined the Marine Corps.
Simplify and thank you, by the way.
Yep. Thank you for your service as well. So I did 4 years in the Marine Corps. I was stateside all the time because at the time I had my now wife, then fiance, and so I didn't want to necessarily go overseas. So I went to A school in Pensacola, Florida. Beautiful Navy base there. Good place to be for spring break, Pensacola Beach.
Wonderful. They let me visit once for 3 days.
And then I did C school at Coronado in San Diego.
Another place that does not suck.
Another place that's beautiful weather. I like to sit on the beach and watch the buds training for the Navy SEALs.
Any desire to go join them?
Fun to watch. And then I figured I was a shoe-in for being stationed in Miramar, because I was a ground support equipment electrician. And then I got
That's for aircraft, right?
Correct. I got my orders and I didn't understand the destination code. So I got on the computer and looked it up, and it was Marine Corps Base 29 Palms, out to the Expeditionary Airfield out in the middle of the Mojave Desert. So we spent 3 years. I came home, we got married, excuse me, went out there and spent 3 years in 29 Palms. That's where my daughter was born, there at the hospital on 29 Palms. And thank goodness the Navy doctors are really good at birthing babies, because when you're in the military and you're poor, there's 2 things that you do. And one of them results in babies, because my daughter ended up being an emergency C-section. They actually had the medevac helicopter sitting there idling to fly her down to Loma Linda NICU if she needed to go. But everything worked out okay. And now she is a junior at Regis University in Denver in nursing school. My wife is a registered nurse. She's an advanced practice oncology nurse. So that is one thing that's a huge contributing factor to our health and wellness journey and what we're doing with cattle. And then our son is 14. He's an 8th grader at Paonia Middle School, and he'll be going to the North Fork Combined High School next year as a freshman, which used to be Hotchkiss High School, and that's where my wife and I graduated together. but the numbers of kids has dropped off so much they combined Peonia High School and Hotchkiss High School together, and now it's called North Fork High School. So when I came back from the Marine Corps, I went to work in the coal mines. That was the big industry, ag and coal mining here in the North Fork Valley. And I worked in the coal mines for 15 years. About 12 years ago, I proposed leasing my in-laws ranch because it had been conventionally ranched by, it had been leased out. And like a lot of people's leased ground, you take what you could take and then you don't leave anything behind. And it's just really where my passion was. I mean, when I started dating my wife, I was a full-time free ranch hand, right? And so I just really fell in love with this place. And I kind of saw the direction that it was going. I didn't like it. My mother-in-law and father-in-law discouraged me greatly from that because they were city folks. They bought land out here in the early 80s and farmed for 10 or 12 years, cattle ranched, conventional cow calf. And it about broke them just because, as you well know, input costs don't ever go down. And the sale barn decides if you live to fight another day or not when you're in that conventional system. And I said, I don't care. I have a good paying job. And so I signed a cash lease with them and I started leasing the place. And it was really easy for a few years because we'd had good irrigation water. The weather was really good. What I was doing was just trying to restore the land.
What time frame was this?
This would have been, I think 2008, 2007, 2008 is when I took it over.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was just trying to heal the land. I was getting all the irrigation infrastructure repaired and put back in shape. And then if I had a good stand of grass, I would hay it and sell it. Just one cutting with the idea that so much of that grass and alfalfa needs to be stimulated either by animal impact or by clipping it, and leaving lots of stubble so there's plenty of solar panels. And through watching that, number one, I saw the forage analysis on the hay getting better. I saw the stands getting thicker. And then I also started studying the different colors of flowers on the alfalfa. It was like nothing I'd ever seen in a book. And so I decided to do a little experiment and I let some of that hay go completely to seed, super over mature. And then I hayed it and I went and rolled that hay out late fall, early winter on some bare ground and pretty much let the deer and elk eat it because I still didn't want to have any cows on because at that time I didn't own any cows. And so that next spring I had baby alfalfa growing in that bare dirt from that hay that I'd rolled out. And so I called one of our agronomists and called a couple of seed companies to see, like, what do you think this is? And they all said, it won't survive. Alfalfa, is autotoxic. It won't if there's anything even close to it in the umbrella of mature alfalfa, that won't grow just because the way that it works and the way that the interaction between the alleles and the soil and all of that. And it did, and it took root. And now I have strips of alfalfa growing where I rolled those bales out.
I hope I can replicate that on my place. I've been trying to roll some alfalfa out and get across some bare areas this winter. And because I'm using alfalfa as my supplemental protein for the winter, managed to keep plenty of stockpiled grass, standing stockpile. So I've got plenty of brown stuff for him to eat, but I just need to haul out a little extra protein. And I've been trying to be strategic about where I'm putting it, try to put it on some bare areas, some areas that have been abused, and hopefully I see that, over the next couple of years, I'll see some of that wild alfalfa come up. But This stuff wasn't like it wasn't cut late. It's not super seedy either. So,
Well, and that's the other thing too, is everything after about 1970, that's been bred out of it. And so what I found later, talking to a couple of the good old boys here, that the last time those fields that I harvested that hay off had been plowed was in the 50s. And that's when they put permanent pasture in following ear corn. And one of them showed me a picture of that field planted in ear corn back in the 40s. And so in talking to the seed dealer, he says, it sounds like what you probably have is what we called floor sweepings. So after we would sort seed all day back then, you'd sweep up what was ever on the floor and you'd bag it, and that would be your discount seed. And so oftentimes the poor farmers who couldn't afford to buy the best of the best, that's what they got. So it would have all kinds of stuff in it. And then through cross-pollination, you would never know what you would get the next year's crop and the next year's crop. So number one, it's for sure not GMO. Number two, the genetics are unproven. So then you effectively have hybrid vigor in an alfalfa. And he says, I'd be interested in coming and looking at that and maybe working with you, which of course, red flag, seed companies, Monsanto, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, no thanks, but no thanks, pal.
Yep, they're either going to like grab the genetics or they're going to spray it so nobody else can have it.
Yeah, and so the colors of flowers on the alfalfa plant, you could have a sprig of alfalfa plant and it will have whites, pinks, reds, light purple, dark purple. And then on another plant, you'll have a purple and a yellow and a white. I mean, it is literally like nothing you've ever seen. And so I've actually shared some of that hay with some friends of mine who wanted to do the same kind of experiment like what you were doing. And last year was so dry and so hot in the spring, I think it probably burned off all of their seedlings. But on a couple of different bare spots here on my property, I have pretty good stands of young alfalfa. And so once we kind of got the land healed back and we had sold some hay off, and I mean, we were selling hay to the horsey people in like Aspen, Vale, Woody Creek, you know, the super high end for $12 a bale for little square bales delivered to them, stacked in their barn.
They thought they were getting a hell of a deal too, didn't they?
Oh, they were, and their horses wouldn't eat anything else. Once they, you know, they would say, hey, can we get some more of that hay? We found another couple of tons, you know, and it looks really nice, but the horses won't eat it. And so I thought, why am I exporting all of these nutrients when I can utilize them on this place, you know? And so I spent an entire year researching breeds and breed associations and marketability and all of that, you know, looking at what sells for what at our local sale barns, looking at seed stock sales, all of those things. And so after a year of digging and searching and talking to some local cattle ranchers, we settled on registered Black Angus cattle. And so we started with a few cows and we wrote a 5-year plan. We sat down and wrote, okay, so this is the numbers we're going to be for this. This is the equipment we need to invest in. This is the infrastructure we need to install. And we'll fund it with my paying job. And 18 months into our five-year plan, we shut the coal mine down and sealed the portals. So my
Obviously
wife,
not your choice.
yeah, obviously, I mean, and I was, you know, by that time I was a shift superintendent, and me and my crews built the forms to pump the grout to seal the portals. Like we were the last underground coal miners on the property. And So my wife and I sat down and we were like, she said, if you really want to do this, if you want to do this full time, now is the time to do it. Because if you go back to work in a coal mine, because there was one more coal mine still operating here in the North Fork, you won't be vested. You won't be completely in it. So we ended up going to the bank. Well, we went to FSA first, and we were too good with our money. We had too much in retirement. We had too much in savings. We couldn't qualify for any of their programs. We're responsible, so we can't have any federally subsidized loans.
Sounds about right.
And which was disheartening to me. And that was my first interaction with FSA and the USD. And I thought, wow, okay.
This is what, like around 2010 or so?
This is going to be later. Cause I think I farmed the ground and just healed it for about 8 years. And so, yeah, I guess that's probably, it's probably 2015, 2014. Yeah, because we've had cattle for 7 years now. So that was probably 2015.
I was going to say, because FSA over the last probably decade and NRCS have just gotten progressively more onerous to deal with. They want more things, more specific things, and they just try to bottleneck you into more stuff. I stay out of there. I don't go in that office anymore.
And so we went to a conventional bank and talked to them, and their terms were just, I was like, this doesn't work. I mean, and of course the president of the bank is a neighbor of ours, and he has cattle, and I was just like, I don't understand. This doesn't work. Our paycheck is once a year, right? And so, and it doesn't seem like a good fit, and I don't know about getting a loan for registered cattle, and on and on and on and on. Well, in the meantime, one of my good friends and neighbors and mentors called me and says, hey, I hear you're wanting to get in. Call one of the ag lenders. They understand the business. Their rates are going to be better, much more flexible. I was like, well, which one do you recommend? So he gave me a number. I called them. They're like, when do you want to meet? And I said, I'm available tomorrow. I'm unemployed. And they sat down. We set up the terms, took out a loan, sourced cattle. And I'll tell you what, advice to someone who takes a loan out to buy cattle: every cow, the decision on that cow, you should make it like your life depends on it.
Because it does.
Because it absolutely does. And I was so excited. There's 2 or 3 cows that I bought. The price was right, but the functionality of the cow wasn't there. And you could kind of see the beginnings of it. One of them had a little foot problem. The other one, if you go back to the Bonsma, what cows should look like. And she just wasn't quite right. There you go.
For those that are just listening to the audio, I'm showing a picture of my background, one of my nice fat cows standing out in a snowstorm.
And so I tied into some that I probably shouldn't have. They still made 3 good calves, and I actually have some mothers that are daughters of theirs. But and then I bought a bunch of bred heifers, and that actually worked out really well, up until the point where the last 3 hadn't been bred the way that they had promised that they were. So I got some experience pulling some calves that were way bigger than they should have been out of first calf heifers. And so that evolved into, okay, we barely made the note the first year. It was a little easier the second year. The third year, we had a pretty good drought, 2018. And we're looking at having to buy hay.
we're looking at having to sell cows to buy hay to try and make your note. We had sold bulls, some registered bulls, and that had been really well, but the input costs in that, because you have to buy feed to essentially finish them. No one will bid on skinny bulls. Honestly, they don't care how you fed them. They just want them to look good, and they want their feet to last for at least the first year, to get out and breed cows. And so, and we're still doing that. The genetics portion of it keeps you relevant in the breed, but it also gives me an opportunity to use my own bulls, kind of built for our program to raise grass-fed beef. And so that kind of got us down like, well, what can we do with some of these cull cows? Everybody eats burger. I could take them to the sale barn and sell them for $600, $700, $800, or I could sell them for $3 a pound processed ground beef and double my money, and so that's kind of started us down on that deal. And then the reviews were fantastic. They're like, can we get some more of that? When we cook ground beef, there's actually meat in the pan. You don't cook hamburgers and you look back and see there's a little hockey puck left,
Gallon of grease.
Right. Or just water, because they're grinding it with ice. They're taking, 2-day-old, 3-day-old cuts that the shine has gone off of them in the case, grinding them with ice to pink them back up and fill. And it's just water.
And imported lean trim.
Yeah.
That's a whole different can of worms.
Yeah. And so we started looking more into that. And so I think last year we butchered 25 beeves. I helped a new butcher reopen a butcher shop in Paonia. He actually comes to the farm. We kill here, eviscerate, skin, split, bleed out. So there's no stress hormones. You can tell it in the meat. Has a big refrigerated truck, takes them and we dry age them in the cooler there, and then he cuts them up. We're still working on fine tuning the butchering end of it, as far as cuts and some new cuts and popular cuts and all of that stuff. And then of course, since I got tied in with the Beef Initiative and Texas Slim and all of those guys, we've gotten a lot more exposure over to the Front Range, and there's lots and lots of health conscious and also financial risk conscious people who are wanting to get some food security in their lives. And so we've been connecting with them. I've been over there twice. I'm going to go over there again next week for a beef delivery. So that's fun and interesting, and meeting those people. I think we have 12 bull calves or yearling bulls that we're marketing. We're actually fertility testing them this afternoon. 4 of them will sell at our consignment bull sale that happens in second Saturday in March at Delta Sales Yard every year. So that's the genetics are fantastic. The stability is there. Their sire is 7 years old. He's one of my herd sires. We've collected him and sold semen all over Western United States on him. And he's one of those bulls you have to starve down to keep him light enough to get out and breed cows at time, because he's such an easy keeper. And his docility is amazing. I mean, I've got selfies of me hanging on his head. And he just takes it like a 2,000-pound dog.
I have one that'll follow me around like a puppy looking for cake. Might not have been the smartest thing to do when he was younger, to train him to come up to me and eat cake out of my hand. But he is gentle. Talking about my bull, he's home raised. Let's see, he's 3.5 years old now. He's only been off this ranch for about less than 60 days of his whole life. Like he doesn't get good feed. Like he gets to go hang out in the pasture and he gets a protein tub, and that's about it. Like,
Well, and that bull that I was talking about, that mountain program 445, I sold a third interest of him to a big seed stock producer in Montana. So he goes up there and breeds cows in the fall for their fall calving herd and comes back here and he walks the mountains on our privately owned mountain lease in the summer. So he gets a workout. And that's the thing is, I mean, he's heavy bone and super stout and he gets around, but he's also smart. And so if you turn him out with, let's say, a yearling bull, he'll let that yearling bull chase the cow around till she'll finally stand. And then he'll sprint over there, push the yearling bull out of the way and mount that cow. So he's like, you do all the work, pup. And when she finally stops, then I'll come and take care of business. Because we DNA test almost all of our registered cattle. And out of the 30 cows that he was with, he bred 25 of the 30. So yeah, he's still has it going on for an old man.
good bull. Sounds like a great bull. Matter of fact.
Yeah, I've enjoyed him. You know, I'm on Twitter and where I was chatting back and forth with Untapped Growth, and they have a Angus herd back there in the grasslands somewhere about out east, and we were talking about sending some semen out there for them to try if they wanted, because it's one of those things that's all of the exposure he's had is here in the West, and he's totally adapted for high altitudes. Because that's one thing in Angus cattle is brisket disease. You know, it's essentially congestive heart failure. It starts with pulmonary artery pressure problems, and then they get congestive heart failure. They start retaining fluid, which is visible in their brisket. That's why they call it brisket disease. And then they fill with fluid. The heart works harder and harder and harder until they usually have a heart attack and die. And so we actually pulmonary artery pressure test. Dr. Tim Holt from CSU comes out. They put a giant trocar needle in their jugular vein, run a catheter through their jugular vein, through their heart, into their pulmonary artery, and it's hooked up to an oscilloscope. And they give a systolic, diastolic, and then an overall measurement in inches of mercury. And that number dictates how valuable that bull is at the bull sale. Because most of our high altitude guys that are running up to 10, 12, 13,000 feet want a 40 PAP or lower.
Okay.
And so that's all printed in our catalog. So you can be a very discerning customer if you're buying bulls at our bull sale or buying them from me private treaty, because all of their PAP data, as well as all of their expected progeny differences, EPDs, are all there because they're all linked to a registration number. My wife, being a registered nurse, when she heard what we were doing, I invited her out, and Dr. Holt let her stick a few and do the PAP testing. And she said, wow, human skin's a lot easier to stick than bovine hide. And the heifers are actually a lot harder to do than the bulls, because the heifer skin it's not thicker, but it's more resilient. And so whereas the steer skin is thicker, but it's rigid. And it was interesting to watch her do it. And then of course, Dr. Holt explaining the why, for, and how, because he's done tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of head of cattle, you know, trying to trace down what genetics work and what genetics don't, and what the probability and all of that stuff is.
It's interesting. And, you know, you're talking about the PAP score. And I'll admit, I was kind of doing a little bit of Facebook stalking and Twitter stalking on you the last couple of days. And I saw that like, what's that? And just scrolled right on past. I'm glad you explained it. That's not something that that's ever in my vocabulary out here on the plains, because my high altitude is just slightly over 2,000 feet. So I don't really need to have mountain adapted cattle that have, and it sounds like the PAP score is more measuring the stability of the circulatory system and how the circulatory and respiratory system can cope with high mountains and thin air, and the heart having to work really hard to keep the blood moving. Is that, do I have that right?
That's exactly right. Yep, that's exactly right. But what we're finding now is it's happening at low elevations, like in the feedlots in Texas and Nebraska. And that's a lot of times due to breeding. When you're breeding an animal to be able to finish it in 14 to 16 months, and what toll that takes on their body, they're finding brisket disease in the feedlots at low elevations. And so what Dr. Holt's been doing is he's been going to feedlots and doing 5,000 head in a feedlot to get an idea of where the cattle came from, what genetics are being used, and also like what their exposure is. Because that's one thing that we found is if you have something that gets pneumonia as a calf or something that gets a respiratory infection as a calf, that scarring in the lungs diminishes their ability to uptake oxygen, and that can be a contributing factor as well. Like our home ranch here is at 7,000 feet. And then the highest point of the lease property that we go to is 9,600 feet. So we don't go that high, but just as an experiment, I kept a couple of my best performing bull calves that pap tested high. One of them was a 46 and one of them was a 52. So essentially unmarketable for high elevation. And I ran those yearling bulls, and their calves are probably the stoutest calves that I have this calf crop. And I think that's because they're just higher performing overall. And that's probably why that PAP number was higher, is they're just operating at a higher level of performance. I think of it like a NFL linebacker versus a college cross-country runner. If you PAP tested each of them to see where they were, I bet that the NFL linebacker would be higher just because he has more mass. His heart's working harder to pump blood through all of his veins, keeping all of that muscle oxygenated versus someone who's, thinner. And I can see it in the cattle because those super low PAP bulls oftentimes just don't quite get to the same point as some of those higher papping bulls. But it hasn't been detrimental. I haven't had any death loss from brisket disease. But that's also because almost all of our cows are PAP tested. And so we're using, proven data back on proven data. But it's an interesting game. And of course, like anything that's dependent on written data and testing, there's always outliers, and that can be so frustrating. Like when you DNA test cattle and you get the EPDs back from the American Angus Association, sometimes it's completely skewed. Like it's went from one end of the spectrum all the way to the other end of the spectrum just because of a DNA test. So had you not DNA'd them, they'd have been very marketable for calving ease. But since you DNA tested them, they found that there's more markers of DNA from a different sire or a different dam, which then changes the numbers. So you go from one to the other. Luckily, with the beef market, they don't care what the numbers were once you pull the hide off of them.
Right. CAB doesn't know what color the hide was when it went into the packing plant.
Exactly.
So what else do you do besides cows?
Well, I do some custom farming. I also do some pasture management consulting. I tell everyone my wife works in town to support my cow habit, which is pretty accurate. And so for me, I'm a full-time cattle rancher, and then I just help a lot of people out. So, I mean, I do side welding jobs for people. I turn wrenches a little bit. I mean, my background, of course, military mechanic and electrician. And then when I was in the coal mine, I was a mechanic electrician before I went into management. And so I have lots of experience on turning wrenches and diagnosing problems and stuff like that. And then the beef market is like 2 full-time jobs in and of itself. It's a marketing job, and then it's a coordinating butchering and delivery job. And so, I mean, return on investment is really good on that, but I oftentimes don't put enough. Well, I put all the energy that I can into it, but there's just not enough hours in the day. A couple of the properties that we lease for summer pasture are irrigated, sub-irrigated, and then some dry land. And so we're doing intensive rotational grazing on those, not nearly as intensive as what you do. But we set out a pasture map and we do a written plan at the beginning of the season, you know, whether it's going to be a 1-day move or a 2-day move or a 3-day move. And we never have cattle in a paddock for more than 3 days, just because some of that grass is trying to regrow. But last year, our growing season was so good, some of those paddocks got away from the cows. And so we actually ended up haying 2 of the paddocks for 2 reasons. Number one, tall grass with seed heads is hell for pink eye. Number 2, the landowner needed the hay to feed his horses. And so we did it on a shares deal that I put up the hay for half the hay. And so that was good for him and good for me. And it was actually really good for the ground, because some of the grass is reed canary grass, and it is such an aggressive grower that we were able to mow it down and then give those shorter, more desirable grasses and legumes a little time to compete. And by then it had started to dry down some, so that reed canary needs so much water. And it also gave me an opportunity to get my swathers stuck. Luckily the neighbors had a big enough tractor to come and pull the swather out. And it was really ironic. They actually moved here from Nebraska, and she brought her 185 horse tractor to pull me out. And she said, "This is the smallest tractor in our fleet. This is the baby tractor." And I was like, oh my goodness. So yeah. And that's an interesting thing. You know, I've done, I don't know how many farm tours on that particular property. And I wish I had taken a lot more photographs before I started, because it had been conventionally farmed, and then, or you know, conventional cattle, and no subdivision fences. So all the desirable grass was mowed to the dirt, and it was really having a hard time. And there were patches where the reed canary grass was 14 feet tall because it hadn't had any animal impact on it at all. And actually they had fenced the cattle out of it, because at one time they'd had an old cow get in there and get bogged down and die, because the skeleton is still there. And which is exactly what that reed canary grass wanted. I mean, that's the perfect environment for it. And so I went in there with my replacement heifers the first year. They're a lot lighter, more agile, and they're not heavy bred down like the cows would have been.
Right.
And we went to that, I think that little triangle section where the reed canary grass was like 7 acres total. And I subdivided it into 5 or 6 pieces, and I kept those heifers in there in each one of those paddocks until they had that reed canary grass either stomped down or mowed as close to the dirt as I could get it, knowing the growth habit of it. And I had 14 heifers in that 7 acres for, I think it was 45 days total. Because by the time I would come back to that reed canary grass would already be 18 inches tall.
Time to mow it again.
Right. And so that pretty much proved up like the capacity of that kind of grass, but it also exposed what we needed to do as far as some trenching and culverts and stuff to try and manage it a little bit better. And then the field immediately above that started to do better because we could drain some of that water off of it, because the bottom edge of the field above it was just super swampy because it was holding all of that moisture in all of that grass. And the heifers did great. I mean, they didn't have calves at side, so they didn't have huge energy requirements. And it got opportunity for me to train them really well to single strand electric fence. And when you're moving them, every 1, 2, 3 days, 4 days, whatever it was, they know when you show up, it's time to go to a new place. So there is no gathering. I mean, granted, it was only 7 acres, so there wouldn't have been any gathering anyways, but that kind of really turned me on to, if you put in the work, just how much bigger return there is. And so the next year we went and I took over the whole place. I think there's 86 acres in the part that I manage. And it's divided into 20 paddocks, some hard fence, some electric fence. And then I have to pump or siphon water out of the canal through poly tubing down to stock tanks to get water to all of them. So that's kind of a pain in the butt, but and it's one of those things where I'm trying to work with a landowner to show him the value of installing some stock water infrastructure. We probably won't get it done this year, but I'm installing stock water infrastructure on my place. So I'll be able to show him the benefits of it, because oftentimes you just have to see it.
Yeah, for sure. So you don't you have some honeybees too?
Oh yeah, I do have honeybees. So, being one of those guys who's always trying to find the source of the seed, you start digging in a little deeper and a little deeper and a little deeper. And you see on the news, our pollinators are struggling, our pollinators are struggling, our pollinators are struggling. And it's like, well, how hard can that be? And so I saw a sign along the side of the road, local honey for sale. And there's all of these multicolored bee boxes all over the yard of this place. So I pull in there and meet these people. And I was like, I've always thought about honeybees, but I've never really, I don't know what it entails. And so Robin and Dave were their names, and they just took a deep dive. And they're like, here, put a suit on, let's go get in a hive. We'll show you exactly what it's all about. and I was like, okay, so I did. And we're doing a hive inspection. We're finding the queen, all of this stuff. I'm like, okay, I want to do it. Well, if you ever have bees for sale, I'm interested in buying bees. When it wasn't a week later, like, yeah, we're going to do a split and it'll be ready in a couple of weeks. This is what it costs. I'm like, okay, deal. So I bought this beehive of bees, brought it to our place here, and it's like an addiction. It's like cows. Oh, I have a cow. I need 2 cows. I need 5 cows. I need 130 cows, because it's just like having an entire herd of cattle in a little box. I mean, you have a hierarchy, just like you have the boss cow, that's the queen. And then you have drones. So she lays eggs, and the nurse bees decide whether it's going to be another worker bee, whether it's going to be a drone, or whether it's going to be a replacement queen. So depending on what they feed that egg or that larvae, once the egg hatches, decides whether it's going to be a drone, a male bee, another worker bee, or it's going to be a replacement for the queen. And then me as a beekeeper, I can artificially make that happen. I can take another box, put it next to it, find the queen, cage the queen, put some new brood and some eggs and some young brood and some worker bees in another box, close it all up, and put the queen back in the original hive. The worker bees in the new split are like, oh my gosh, we don't have a queen. There's no queen pheromones. Let's raise another queen. And you can do that over and over and over again. I mean, and there's just so much to it, as far as when you need to feed bees, how much honey you need to leave on for the bees, always paying attention to the colors and types of pollen that they're bringing in, and so then you have honey that's marketable, you have beeswax that's marketable, you have custom pollination, because there's a lot of organic orchards around that pay pollinators to bring bees in. And trapping pollen and selling pollen. And the other thing too is you're helping your forages by providing additional pollinators. And so it's like this completely symbiotic relationship with your bees that are helping the plants, which are helping the soil, and also helping your cows and helping you. Because if you eat honey that's raised on your own place, you have all of the medical benefits of whether it is the micronutrients that they're getting, pollens and stuff, as far as allergies. I mean, there's just so many benefits to eating your own honey, or even for the people that I market honey to, eating local honey that's unadulterated. Because so oftentimes commercial beekeepers heat their honey because it's way easier to handle when it's warm. When you're doing all your bottling while it's cold, it takes a lot longer because it moves pretty slow. But that kills so many of the beneficial bacteria, because honey, of course, is nectar and
Right.
little bits of pollen and bee spit, because they suck it into their honey stomach and then they spit it back out, give it to another worker. That worker sucks it in and then carries it through the hive and deposits it in the honeycomb. So the actual forager is not the one who puts it in. It's another worker, another house bee, before it gets put in. And, I've seen numbers as many as 20,000 trips to make a teaspoon of honey.
I think that's true. I've seen a graphic where it's like representation of like the shape and size of a bee, and it's just like a black outline, and just a tiny little bit of the abdomen is shaded in yellow, and that represents how much honey that bee can make over its lifetime. Like, I love honey. I don't have bees, and we try to get our honey from a couple different places. There is a guy here in the county that has bees and sells honey. There's an Amish community store pretty close that sells honey. Like, they usually have 2 or 3 different I guess, brands, for lack of a better term. They've got kind of like the Amish house brand and a couple different local brands. Anyway, the point is what I'm saying. I love local honey because you never know what it's going to taste like. There's always a slightly different bouquet of botanicals and botanical notes in every bottle. And there's a big difference between, summer honey and winter honey and the richness and just the richness of it. And since we've started eating a lot of local honey, we kind of ran out. And one of my things to do first thing in the morning is I like to have a couple big teaspoonfuls of honey first thing in the morning, with before I even have coffee. And that's kind of helps, light the fire and get me going. Store-bought honey, it doesn't matter what brand you buy, what the bottle is, it all tastes the same. That's not possible. Either they're taking thousands of gallons of honey, putting it in a vat and mixing it up and then bottling it so it's a consistent product, or they're adulterating it somehow. And that's all I'm going to say because I don't want to get sued.
Well, I will say that you can test honey, because anytime that you want to get in a program, because they have USDA bee insurance, right?
Of course they do, because we have to have bees for the USDA insured almond farmers out in California.
Right. And so they will test your honey for free for you to be able to prove that it's pure honey. Because, when there are feeders inside every box of a commercial beekeeper's hives, there's a pretty good chance that the reason that store-bought honey is as much sucrose or fructose as it is honey, because there is a break in time that you have to stop feeding in the spring when they're actually putting honey on, to ensure that there's no funny honey. That's what we call it, is funny honey, because it's feed. It's not actually nectar, right? They're taking sugar out of the feeder, sugar water out of the feeder, and they're putting it and storing it. And that's the same thing in the fall, is you have to pull all of your honey supers off before you start feeding again in the fall, to make sure that they're not storing sugar, white sugar mixed with water, in your honey crop. And that's the thing that I've noticed, exactly what you're saying. And so oftentimes, store-bought honey it's just the same flavor. It's just blah.
So it's not that they would be adding things like high fructose corn syrup to the honey, then bottling it. It's that they're feeding the bees that high fructose corn syrup and sugar water, and the bees never have to leave the hive to make honey.
That could be the reason. Exactly right. And if you look at, let's say you go to Whole Foods and they have a big sign that says organic honey, and you take the bottle off of it and you turn it around and you look at it and it says product of Brazil.
Yeah.
Put it right back on the shelf and go next to it where it says clover honey, and you take it off of there and it's like product of whatever apiaries, Salt Lake City, Utah. You know what I mean? Okay, I'm going to buy that. But that's that advertising draws their attention. So few consumers actually read the fine print.
And sometimes that fine print says, oh, this crop was picked in Argentina and packaged in Thailand, and now it's being sold in Southern California.
Yeah. So that's pretty green.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible. There was something, I think I brought this up a couple episodes ago. I saw that there was is Brazil or Argentina. They had bought this massive blueberry shipment from Southeast Asia, shipped it to South America, labeled as organic, and then shipped it up here to sell it. And they got caught. They got caught selling, I don't want to say GMOs, but they got caught, totally misrepresenting a product as organic that wasn't. And that happens. It happens, like we're talking about, it happens with honey. It happens with blueberries. We talked about it earlier, and we're sure it happens with beef. I mean, we take these old cull cows, throw them in a grinder. I don't buy that we're importing only lean trim. It doesn't make any sense. But that's probably another conversation for another time. What other animals do you have running around on the farm besides your bees and your cows?
Well, we have a couple of CUNY sows that I just got done breeding to a Duroc boar. And so we're working on that IPP cross, the Idaho pastured pig cross. The CUNYs are like miniature cows. Like I had them out in the yard most of the summer because my cow dogs do a pretty good job of keeping them corralled, but they're grazers. I mean, they don't hardly root unless you make the ground muddy or it's super loose soil. Whereas like that Duroc boar, when I borrowed him to breed these sows, I turned him in the garden first and let him rototill the entire garden. And then I took him to a new paddock, or well, it's a dry lot. And I let him turn all of that compost. And then I put him with the sows to breed sows because those pigs do a fantastic job rototilling. I mean, they really do. And they go at it like a man on a mission.
You got me thinking about this giant garden that we want to put in this year and thinking about how much diesel or time it's going to take to get that ground chewed up. Man, do I know anybody with any pigs could bring him out here for a couple days?
Well, and that was just it. So I think it took him 7 days to completely turn over the entire garden spot. And then I took and put like 4 bucket loads of manure and bedding out of the dry lot and dumped it in on top of him. And then he rooted all through that to pick any seeds and mixed it in as well. So, I mean, it's almost a prepared seed bed by now.
Hopefully you grow some good vegetables in it this year.
Yeah. Well, if we have enough water, that's the problem is last year we had 23 days of irrigation water. So the few vegetable plants, and I kept the raspberries alive, I was having to use domestic water to water them.
Okay. Put that in context and perspective. You got 23 days of water total out of your irrigation canal. Now, from what I understand, like if there's water, you're told you can have water today, but you can't just say, well, I don't want it today. I want to save that for 2 weeks later. You can't do that, right? Like it's either use it or it's gone.
Right. And in the irrigation company that's here on Fruitland Mesa, once we turn the ditch on, it's on until the reservoir goes dry. So that is correct. But some of the other properties that I lease, it is reservoir water that you can call on. And it's a 3-day turn or a 4-day turn. So you either have it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or you have it Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And it's a total volume of water. So let's say that you own.
Yeah. Explain that to me. How does that work?
So let's say you own 100 acre feet of water. So you own 100 acres of water 1 foot deep. And you use a measuring device, either a partial flume or a submerged orifice, or in some cases, a digital flow meter to measure your water. And so, okay, you're like, okay, if I order half a foot, half an acre foot, I can run 36 gates of gated pipe. Let's just say it's totally hypothetical, right? So sections of
what's a gate in this context?
gated
I
pipe.
I don't irrigate anything. I pump just a little bit of water for cows with solar wells.
Well, they have PVC pipe that has little rectangle holes cut in it that you run water into, and then has a plastic sliding gate on it. And so if you've ever seen like row crop irrigation that uses furrows, and
Okay, so we're
flood the
talking
water.
about a big pipe kind of across the field, and you move these slides to adjust how much water comes out. But then there's a valve up at the inlet to control how much water you're taking from your allotment.
Exactly right. And in most cases, it's a concrete structure that has like a sliding metal gate that slides out into the flow of the ditch or slides back in to shut you off. Or if you're in a completely piped system, it's just like that. You'd have a big canal gate, sliding gate or butterfly gate that you would, turn down or turn up, and then you're watching a meter, the flow on a either a sweeping analog meter or a numbered digital meter. And so you order, a foot a day for your 4-day turn, and then that's all you get until you call for more water. So here on Fruitland Mesa, 2018, and then 2020 and 2021 are 3 of the driest years in the history since the Mesa was settled, which was 1890s.
Okay.
And so in 2018, we had 32 days of irrigation water, and that was only because we had saved that water the previous year. Like, we were watering into September and it was starting to freeze every night, and we're just wasting the water. So we're like, let's shut the canal off. We'll save that water. Well, the 32 days that we had was just what was left over from the year before, because we got no runoff at all whatsoever.
So how many days would be ideal?
90 days would make most of us really happy.
Okay. Wow. So basically the last 3 years, you've been dealing with less than a third of what would be ideal.
Correct. And then as it prolongs, your soil moisture gets less and less and less, and your plants get more and more stressed. So they're going to need more water to recover. And so, of course, what we do is all of our cows go somewhere else as soon as we are done branding. So generally by the middle of April, everything's calved out, we brand, and the pairs go to another property that has a better irrigation outlook. And then we've left a bunch of standing forage behind up there. So I order 2 tractor trailers, and they come, and I take the cows across the road to the neighbor's loadout facility, and we sort cows and calves, put them on tractor trailers and haul them up to the mountains and kick them out up there.
Okay.
Other than the 2 properties that are down low, which are like our showcase intensive rotational grazing properties. And so my fall calving cows and some steers and some replacement heifers will go on those properties for this summer.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about your mountain lease. I'm curious to understand how these mountain leases and grazing pools work.
So we have 3 landowners that we work with on our mountain leases. One of them is an absentee multimillionaire landowner that bought the property as a hunting property. And it has millions of dollars of NRCS installed stock water infrastructure. And the last 2 winters, we've been putting in center pivot irrigation on it as well. And so the way that works is it's cross-fenced, paid for by the NRCS as far as the forage program. And so we utilize all of that cross fencing, and then I subdivide it with single strand poly as well, just to get better utilization. And so the lease on that is I take care of the fence and I do the irrigating in exchange for the grass.
Okay.
And so on that property, the total property is 1,630 acres, which just got put back on the market again. So we'll see how that goes. The realtor actually called me to see what the terms of our lease was, and if I would be interested in taking care of it under a new landowner if it ended up selling. So I told him the terms of the lease, and if that was the terms of the lease, I would be interested in doing it again. Because then again, they built it has a huge lodge on it. It's like a 11 bedroom, 12 bathroom. I mean, it's beautiful. And then he built a big shop garage that has a full wild game meat processing facility with walk-in cooler and walk-in freezer on it as well. And
that could be a handy thing to have.
Yeah, for sure. And we just finished I think it's 90-acre wiper pivot on it this fall. And so it is actually going to be irrigating over some of the original homestead hay meadows. So productivity should be really good on it for grass. But the property below that is owned by one of the Koch brothers. It was part of their Bear Ranch thing that they were doing. It's been for sale for a long time. It has a big BLM pasture lease. That's part of it as well. And I've been talking to the guy that has it leased about possibly subletting it. It actually has the one of the original businessmen in Hotchkiss built a big cut stone castle on it. And so that stone house is on it. Beautiful, but I mean, it hasn't had any updates, since 1900 when it was built. But
I'm making a note to go Google a picture of that, like stone castle.
Yeah, so it's the ranch name is called 7X. So if you Google 7X Hotchkiss, Colorado, it'll come up and you can look at it. It's pretty cool. It's got a matching carriage house on that property. It's got tall black wrought iron fence around the whole thing. And then the property below that is one of the widows. I leased her husband's cows and then all of their property. And so there's a irrigated 40, and then there's 320 acres, which is where she lives. And then there's 1,000 acres of really rough mountain ground that I leased from her also. So I can literally start at the bottom property, graze, and then move to this intermediate property, which is the 7X, and then open a gate and go to the next property, which is the Carlson place, graze through it, and then go to the Upper Smith place, all contiguous. And the 1,000 acres is all wide open. It starts in the oak brush in the creek bottom, which is a super steep, big boulder bottomed, pretty well roaring, great fly fishing creek. And then it goes oak brush, and then it goes up into some big aspen meadows and aspen basins on the top back corners of it. One of the corners on the Forest Service side is called Hell's Hole, because it's some rough, big blow down trees. I've been trying to figure out a way to get back in there and deal with some of the blow down trees, because it's like a giant pixie sticks of 30-inch diameter aspen trees.
And they're probably a lot taller than the trees I have here.
Yeah, they're 130 feet or something probably. But so I'm up there once a week walking the fence line with fencing tools and a chainsaw, because the trees, they haven't been managed ever. And when the tree's on the fence, that means the cows are out.
Yep.
And then they're adjacent to 70,000 acres of forest land. So when they're out, they're out.
They're probably a little difficult to go track them down.
Luckily, most of them don't stray far from the fence, which I have found is interesting. I think it's because they know the side that they came from, so they don't just trail off, because they very easily could. I've had a few trail off, and then when the permittee, that's my neighbor, gathers, he ends up just taking them to his corrals, and I go over and pick them up there. But it's interesting. I had the forest ranger call me one time and say, "Hey, I think you've got cows out. We just rode the dry creek fence, and there's some fence trees on the fence and some cows out." That's the only time I've ever been contacted by anyone on that side that there were cows out, because all the rest of the way around is private land, and they'll be the first one to call you when you got cows out.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I can imagine the government might be a little bit slow to call, but the neighbors, if you got cows out on the neighbor, that's usually the quickest way to find out about it, is they'll call you. So where all do you market your beef?
Almost all word of mouth. I mean, I have put like a little blurb up on Facebook, and really that's about it. There are a couple of small restaurants that buy meat from us, mostly ground beef, and they'll do like a Rick Ranch's lasagna night special or something like that. But for the most part, word of mouth. And generally when people are searching and find me, their approach to the whole process is way different than me reaching out to them and trying to sell them something. And really, those are the customers that I am interested in. And of course, I have a 100% satisfaction guarantee thing. And believe it or not, I've only ever had 2 complaints that I actually had to have action on. And for me, it's like, I want suggestions. I'm all about constructive criticism. And if there's anything that you could see me doing better or differently, or even just your personal preference, please reach out to me, because this is an ever evolving system and an ever evolving process. And we want our product to meet the demands of the consumer. And I love doing farm tours, and I love communicating about what we do and why we do it. The other thing too is, I mean, there's health stories of my customers, like the one lady who had been vegan for 12 years, was in a car wreck, had a major brain injury, and then through physical therapy, never could get over the hump of healing. And she was telling me this, and I was like, well, do you realize animal protein is the building blocks of brain, right?
Eat a cheeseburger.
You know, and she was like, well, I just don't really know if my system could even handle it. And I'm like, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a package of fillets. It's like the smallest cut and the finest texture. And even if you just thaw it out, cut half of it, cook half of it, cut it really small, just to get yourself kind of going. And just try it. I'm telling you, you need animal protein. That's what your hookup is, or your hang up is in this process. And so she did. She ate it. About 2 weeks later, she called me practically in tears of like, you wouldn't believe about the physical therapy session that we just had. And I'm like, I bet I will. And so she's been buying a quarter of a beef for me. So she went from no meat at all whatsoever, no animal products, all the way to eating a quarter of a beef.
That's a lot of cow.
That is a lot of cow. But she's also really big into sharing it with her friends, especially the people that were vegan and are like, hey, I think you need this to be healthy. Try a package of steaks or whatever. And so that's been, it's stories like that that make you get out of bed in the morning.
And the last couple of years, we've been hearing so many of those stories about vegans that have been vegan for years and they think they're getting along okay, and then something happens, like whether it's a high level athlete, MMA fighter, or just somebody getting in a car accident and having to heal up from that. The body doesn't heal on a vegan diet. Like, okay, most people cannot thrive on a vegan diet. I'm not saying there aren't some outliers out there, because we agree, like, if you want something that's 95%, it has to be very, very specific, but you can make almost an 80 to 90% generalization. And that's pretty much applicable to everybody. Kind of gets back to that Pareto principle thing. But then we hear these stories of vegans and vegetarians that can't heal their body for months and months at a time, and then they eat a steak or they eat a cheeseburger, and all of a sudden they feel better and their body starts to heal and their body starts to work again. I think those are some of the best people to reach, is because a lot of them have a misguided idea about what guys like you and I do. Like, they might have seen a couple of things in the news or in the media about the absolute worst side of animal agriculture. Like, let's just say a chicken house, or, a 10,000 or 100,000 head feedlot that's right next to a slaughter plant. They see that. That's what they see. And they don't want to be a part of that. They say, well, animal agriculture is evil. I don't want any part of that. So I'm just going to go vegan. Well, that has its problems too. In order to eat, that vegan or vegetarian diet, we're talking about, not having cows anymore. We're talking about vast areas of monoculture agriculture and industrial processing to make all this food. And that is better for the environment than cows that are genetically designed to eat grass, to basically take the worst crap that grows in the pasture and upgrade it as a protein source to something that's human edible. Another great point is almost every animal is edible. There's very few that you can't eat, but very, very few plants are edible all the time. Like, there's some plants that you can eat during a narrow window, like, fruits or vegetables or things like that. But a lot of those things are toxic until they're ready to be eaten, because they don't want to be eaten until the right time. A grass plant always wants to be eaten. It's always putting out pheromones and chemicals to attract something to come eat it. And we as managers, we have to manage that signal and only let our grazing animals just take the right amount of grass before we let it rest and regrow.
Yeah, and I don't know how you feel about Yellowstone, but when Kevin Costner is telling that, anti-animal protein gal, how cute does the animal have to be before you care, to kill it to make your food, when you kill every snake, mouse, vole, bacteria,
Rabbit, deer,
right, to plow it up, to plant your quinoa or whatever. And I mean, good on Taylor Sheridan for coming up with that line, because really that's the truth. That is the honest to goodness fact of monoculture agriculture.
I don't watch Yellowstone. Like, my TV is on maybe 2 hours a week, 3 tops, and I'm usually not paying attention even when it's on. But I saw that quote. I saw that meme going around social media. I was like, yes, finally, we've got something on the television that's entertainment that people are watching because they want to entertain, and they're giving out, that good little nugget of knowledge. That being said, I don't know what else they're saying on the show that I wouldn't agree with, or I might want to write to the producers and say, hey, that's not how we do cows. That's not how cows should be done. that's beside the point. It's getting that into the public conversation. It's getting that, people eat vegan because, oh, cows are cute and I don't want cows to suffer. I don't want any animal to suffer. Well, you're not thinking about the millions of insects that inhabited that farm field. You're not thinking about the birds that ate them. You're not thinking about the thing that ate the bird, or the thing that eats the thing that eats the bird. Like, it's all a beautiful, complex, interconnected web of life. It's not even a chain. I mean, it is an interconnected web. And as we've gone through the years of intensive crop and chemical farming, it's like we're going through with a pair of scissors and we're cutting pieces out of this web, and it's starting to get unstable. And there's a point where the web collapses, and I hope we can stop cutting legs off of that web before that happens.
Yeah, and that's an interesting side note about that chemical agriculture. So one of the widows that I lease her husband's remaining cows and then all of their properties, he died from cancer, and they had a conventional orchard. And of course, he grew up in the idea that if it was a plant that you didn't like, you sprayed it.
Post World War II, rise of chemical fertility, rise of pesticides.
And he tells stories when he was a kid, when his father and grandfather were using a horse-drawn spray rig to spray their fruit, how they just had to budget a new team of horses every year, because by winter time, those horses would die. And so
should have been a warning sign.
Absolutely. And so it was one of those things that they were happy when they got their first spray tractor, because they didn't have to worry about horses dying, but they still weren't wearing protective equipment themselves spraying. And it wasn't even until
because the science said it was safe, right?
That's right. And that's the thing. I mean, you read those emails that ended up getting released from Monsanto when they were talking about Roundup and all of that stuff, and just how ruthless. I mean, they were talking about, yeah, we have this, group of farmers who were standing against us at first, and we're pretty sure that we can coax them into being spokespeople for using this technology. And even though we know what, the potentials are for negative health effects, and on and on and on and on. And you're just like, oh my goodness, you knew that you were going to hurt people and kill people, but that was okay because it was just part of business. I mean, that's scary to me.
We're just numbers.
Yeah. So that makes it really easy for me to take people on tours of our farm and ranch, and I show them all of our scars just as well, as long as our successes and everything for, this is why we do what we do. This little section could be better if we chose to use chemicals, if we chose to plow it up and reseed it. But what we're doing is we're feeding on it. We're feeding mature hay to try and get germination without having to break the soil. Because here I have places where there's massive sandstone shelf on the surface. Like there is no soil.
Right.
And so I started feeding on top of those essentially as soon as we started having our own cattle, and then even bedding them in corn stalks out on top of that, to build soil on top of that bare rock. And it's amazing what that has done, in the last 7 years that we've had animals on this property. And then now we're working on doing permanent major subdivision fence to be the backbone of our intensive rotational grazing on this property as well. Here on Fruitland Mesa, it's a huge north-facing plateau with very limited water resources. And so it was easy when we had those good water years, and then it got very, very hard. And the first thing that I realized is we just had to destock. We couldn't let the cows wander this. And so we essentially dry lotted the few cows that we had left that we hadn't sold and fed them in a dry lot, because I knew if we just let them graze the whole place right down to the dirt, that it may never recover. And that was really hard to do because we were so focused on this rotational grazing and giving all the animals space and all of that stuff. But that was the sacrifice that we had to make to preserve the integrity of the plants and the soil. And so then we had built the herd back up until this last year, and we were short on hay again, and so I ended up selling half the cows. So we're up to 130 mother cows, and we sold 60 mother cows to be able to afford to buy enough hay to feed through this year. And if we don't get more snow and more irrigation water, we'll have to essentially figure something out different for next year.
I was going to ask, because, we're closing in on the end of February as we record this. And like I said, I'm not real sure when it'll come out, week or two, maybe 3. So how are you looking for irrigation water this year? How does the snowpack look? And I guess what I'm really getting at is, how soon do you need to make that destock decision based on what you feel your available irrigation water is going to look like?
So spring is a time of hope in every segment of ag. And oftentimes that's some of your strongest markets as far as pears or bred heifers. And so typically it'll be before we pay to haul those cows to the mountains, we'll have to make that decision on how many cows we keep. And the pasture is cheap feed for us for the most part, because your per head payment is pretty low. And so it's easy to think, well, we'll just keep them through the cheap feed, and then when we come off in the fall, we'll sell them then. Well, that's the glut. That's when all of your cull cows, everybody with nasty dispositions, all of that stuff are all hitting the market. So unless you have a market to sell 10,000 pounds of ground beef, you're better off to get a better price for them in spring and maybe buy a few calves to fill that capacity and then just sell the pounds versus holding on to the cows and then giving them away in the fall.
Right. If you're in a drought situation and you're waiting until fall or late summer when everybody else has realized that there's no water and they don't have any grass, and you're trying to haul those critters to the barn, it's gonna hurt. It's gonna be painful.
Right, and that's what we did last year. Is we sorted before we hauled to the mountain, so we knew what cows were going. You had some that were nasty disposition. You had some that had little calves, or they calved late, so you knew there was a good chance they were going to calve late again. Couple that had some foot problems and whatever. If there was any reason for them to go, they went. And there were some cattlemen that were really happy because they had bought new permits and they didn't have enough capacity to fill the numbers. So they were going to end up paying for it anyways. And this was an opportunity for them to put cows that had either calved in their window, or they do all their work on horseback, and you can deal with nasty cows when you rope the cow and tie her to a tree, or let your horse hold her while you tag the calf, or whatever that happens to be. So we were able to get a better price. And then of course there's a couple of those cows that were getting on in years that we knew we would just grind for burger. So we went ahead and carried them through and then butchered them in the fall.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I just glanced at the clock. We're getting close to being out of time here. Have I forgot to ask anything?
I don't think so. But I mean, I haven't heard your story in the few of your 5, 6, 7 of your podcasts that I've listened to.
How long do we want this episode to be? It's going to get told, Jason. I promise you it'll get, the whole story will get told eventually. Bits and pieces that have come out. The short end of it is I pretty much grew up out on the ranch. Dad took over in 1985 was his first year operating it. And when he took it over, it was just basically the land base, set of corrals, and 3 big pastures. That was about it. He went to ranching for profit in 1986 because he didn't know what he was doing, or maybe it was 88. I get it confused. He's been 2 other times. At the ranch now, it's still basically 3 different grazing units. And that's just because geography. I've got 6 miles of paved road and 2 miles of county dirt road running through the middle of the ranch. Other than that, everything's in a block. Everything's continuous. So that's kind of nice. But because of the blacktop roads and the relatively high amount of truck traffic, say 100 to 250 trucks a day, go through the intersection that's right there, kind of in the middle of the ranch, just upstream, just up the hill from Dad's house. So there's a fair amount of truck traffic, which makes moving across the highway or moving across the blacktop a little bit problematic. So I just don't do it. So the place is managed basically in 3 big units. So I usually have 3 herds on the ranch that are all under slightly different types of management. The parts of the ranch that are set up for strip grazing, total of about 13.5% of the total land area of the ranch is set up for strip grazing, and it's all on the south end. So the south end is what I'd call more of the top of the ridge. So slopes from 3 to 5%. I mean, it's not a mesa, it's just the top of a ridge, slopes from 3 to 5, and then that breaks over to a 5 to 15% slope to go down to some fairly shallow draws and canyons. The north end of the ranch, all the water off the ranch basically flows north. So elevation goes down, but I've got places on the north end of the ranch that aren't much lower than places on the south end, but then the canyons where the creeks are, that's some of my lowest stuff. I'll have 140 foot of elevation change in less than a quarter of a mile coming from a creek bottom back up to that ridge top, back down to the creek bottom, back up to the ridge top. So, and closer up to the north end, we see a lot of inclines like you guys see out there in Colorado, 30, 35 degrees. I mean, stuff that you damn near can't walk up, much less run a string of polywire up and down it. So fencing is a challenge. A lot of times I'll fence off a canyon and make them stay in the canyon, or I'll keep them out of the canyon to build up a store of fuel so we can burn it out later. I came back, I got out of the Navy in 2006. I was an East Coast guy. So Norfolk, Virginia, like 8 years. You think 29 Palms is bad. Like go spend a couple years in Norfolk and you'll have a whole new appreciation for Southern California and the Mojave Desert. So yeah, about eight and a half years in the Navy. Kind of similar to you, I did mechanics. I was a main propulsion and machinery mechanic. After steering gear, aircraft elevators, anchor windlass. That's a lot of the stuff I worked on my first ship, which is an aircraft carrier. And then I crossed over to gas systems, turbine technician, mechanical, and I went to work on our destroyer in the engine room. So a lot of the same stuff, pumps, pipes, valves, winches, windlasses, air compressors, fuel pumps, lube oil pumps, and of course gas turbine engines, which was really cool. But the big differences is a lot of those skills crossed over between jobs. It was just the main heat source was different. That was a little different to learn, but a lot of those skills still serve me. Just knowing how to use tools, knowing how to understand a complex engineering system. Like I can still trace out in my head a lot of systems on the destroyer that I had to know. And, like you have to know them and map them out, you know. And what a lot of people do is you walk down the pipe hand over hand, like, okay, here's a valve, and you draw the valve in, and then you keep going. And once you have it all mapped out on your paper, then you can kind of start to look at it and understand it. Like, okay, the pump's here, and where it's going is here, but then there's all these pipes and valves. So how do these open and close to make fluid go where I need it to go? When I look at pasture map on my computer, it's kind of almost the same thing. I got a bunch of different blocks, and I got a group of cows, and I know where the gates are. It's like, how do I move these around to get them to all the flow where I need them to flow to get back to where I need them to be when I need them to be there? So I don't have to bring them from, 2 miles away, the far corner of the ranch, across 7 paddocks just because it's time for preg check. So I try to have things scheduled to where things are close within range, where I can just pull them through 2 or 3 paddocks, or they're right there by the corrals when I need to bring them in to do work. Then when you get into that thing, like, okay, we're using the same parts of ground, the same types, using the same piece of ground to do the same thing at the same time of year, years and years in a row. And it takes some planning to avoid that. So.
Well, and what I've done is I've got a trailer load of panels, because most of these properties, they tore down or burned down the corral. And so I've got panel corrals all over the county, just specifically for that, because inevitably something's going to happen. And I'm by myself doing all of that, most of the time, me and my 3-legged cow dog, and so that's one of those things where sometimes I'll leave a set of corrals set up. And sometimes I'll break it all back down and stack it on the trailer, and me and the dog will go, wherever to the next place. So how many acres is your home place then?
Between the acres that I own, deeded acres, and that what I leased from the family partnership, it's just under 7,000 acres.
Holy smokes.
But it's a different paradigm. Different forage, different carrying capacity. It seems like a lot, and there's days where it seems like I'm on the go every day, one corner to the other, back and forth. Oh, time to go to the shop. Forgot this tool. Oh, well, need this part. Got to go to town. It can be a pain, but then again, it's awful nice because I can go set out and watch my cows and not even see a road.
Well, that's the thing for me, is like, it's 45 minutes drive from the home place up to the lowest mountain pasture. And then it's unloading an ATV, and driving for 20 or 30 minutes at times to even find where the cows are, because they're wide open in 1,000 acres.
Right.
And it is rough, steep, and there's not roads all over it, I actually bought 2 tractor trailer loads of CRP grass, Kansas grass. Interesting forage to look at, to dig through and see what the different kinds of grasses and stuff that's there. I was surprised at how much prickly pear cactus got baled up in some of them.
Prickly pear cactus is surprisingly good cow feed if you get the spines burned off of it.
Yeah, that's what those friends in Texas say. They're out there with a weed burner burning the needles off, and the cows just go to town.
We've gotten rid of a lot of our prickly pear because, since Dad took over the ranch, it's been burned multiple times. Most recently, I haven't lit it on fire yet, but last time the ranch was on fire was 6 years ago. We had a wildfire come through, burnt the whole thing. Like in 3 hours, it was across the whole ranch. Well, you're in Colorado. You know what wildfires are. 95% of the wood on the ranch was gone, and that includes all my wood in the fence.
Oh gosh.
You want to talk about a long summer, putting a lot of H braces in, rebuilding a lot of gates. I had to take out every foot of electric fence wire, which was 26 miles, all got replaced summer of 16. We did 140 H braces and in a weekend with a couple of different crews of kids. And you should have seen it. It was cool. I had like 5 welding trucks in the yard, I had a guy whose whole job was in the skid steer, just moving material back and forth to keep welders busy. Had 3 guys running cutting torches. Had guys welding up corner braces, and a lot of times, as soon as they were done, before the welds were even cool, they were hitting a trailer to go out to the pasture to get planted in the dirt. I had shout out to my good friend Travis Ponick, who interned with us summer of 09. He came back down in 16 to help us rebuild fence. I mean, man, that was handy. I just gave him a crew of people and I was like, go, just go make stuff happen. They were out working and he called me to check in. He's like, yep, we did everything at 4 corners in 17 minutes. I'm like, what? So they went up top of a hill, pulled out the remains of 4H braces and set 4 new ones in concrete to spec, like the exact right space for the gates, in 17 minutes, and went on to the next one. If I start naming names, I'll forget most of them. They're on a sheet. All the people that came and helped me rebuild fence in the aftermath of 2016 couldn't have got it done. It was truly a team effort. And I'll say this, since then, like there were big fires in 17, big fires in 18, and there were big fires just, 3 months ago up in northern Kansas. The response, I guess it's another way to reach some of these urban people, these urban dwellers that don't exactly know our story. That fire event was leveraged, I suppose. And I guess that saying in Hollywood, any publicity is good publicity. There's no such thing as bad publicity. There's just publicity. When that fire came through, there was a lot of people the first few days that were just super upset. Like, oh, burned up all the grass will never come back. Well, okay. Hold my beer. Just wait 2 weeks. We'll get a rain. It'll come back. This is not a problem. Oh, well, I, had a bunch of cows burn up. Okay. Sorry. That sucks. Well, my fences are all burned up. Well, I guess it was probably time to rebuild some of them anyway. And at the end of the day, the message I started really, really trying to push was, guys, we needed this fire because all the invasive brush, all the invasive trees that have built up over the last, 50 years, we've been planting the damn things. We let these cedar trees get out of control. And now, sometimes it's cost of thousands of dollars an acre to go in and clear them out. Well, you make wildfire does that real cheap. And then you just have to go deal with the carcasses. So that's another man, we could do a whole podcast about how to clean up wildfire damage and what to do with tree carcasses.
Well, and that's the thing with the beetle kill here, because a lot of our pinyon trees are now afflicted with the beetles. And you listen to a school of thought biologists talk about how to mitigate it. And I'm like, I understand that that's what the textbook says, but what I'm telling you is we've set ourselves up by putting the fires out for the last 120 years. I mean, and it's not going to get any better.
And I think more and more people, not just guys like us that are out there every day and see it every day, but like the professional federal land managers, they're starting to see it and they're starting to understand and push back against federal policy and say, guys, we need to change this. And Kansas is 96 or 97% privately owned. So there's a little corner of federal grasslands over in the southwest corner of the state, and then the federal government kind of owns Fort Riley, and that's about it. Like the state isn't really that much of a majority landowner here. So I don't have a lot of perspective on BLM and Forest Service managers and things like that. So it's always great to talk to folks like you, Jason, and get some of that perspective and hear what it's like living with them as a neighbor side by side.
Yeah, and it's actually, I mean, it's a great deal as far as subsidized feed. I mean, they're paying, not very much money for really high quality forage. That's what I've found, neighboring the forest with this private land is the nutrient density of that high elevation feed is significant. I mean, the calves that came off of that ground this last year with it being so dry and so hot, because number one, they got shade because they've got big mature trees. And then you've got short but super nutrient dense grass. And it's big enough that they can travel. You could see them. And then I steer them with salt. That's how I move them around is I'm going to salt here and they can smell it from miles away. And then they're going to come to salt. And you see how much better the ground looks, the places where you've let cattle forage, because that one absentee landowner didn't want me to graze any of the upper end of that property, and the grass and the new Gambell oak, scrub oak is so thick that I think I've got him convinced to let me graze it this year, just simply for an access standpoint, because you can't even walk through it. It's so thick because it hasn't had cows on it for a couple of years. So.
Well, good deal. We got to get out of here. I gotta go do some actual work for the day.
All right.
Where can we find you on the internet?
Well, we have Rick Ranch's Facebook page, and then I have Jason Wrich Facebook page, and we're on Twitter, Beef, Bees, and Bitcoin, and Instagram, Jason Wrich. We have a fairly Spartan free Google business website. I'm actually getting more and more traffic on that. Just post a few pictures and stuff like that. And then of course, now we're entrenched with Texas Slim and the Beef Initiative. So that's been going really well and fun and exciting. We're talking about having a get together here in the North Fork in July, it sounds like. I actually have a meeting with a couple of local organizations next week to see if they'd be interested in being part of that as well. So we're going to iron out some details and should have some more information on that for sure after Kerrville, because I'm going to go down to Texas and see what that first Beef Initiative get together looks like and help me direct traffic for what's going to happen up here.
For sure. I've been looking for an excuse to come to Crawford in the summer for about 2 years now. So
well, that would be a pretty easy one.
We'll try to make it work this year.
Awesome.
Is there anything I forgot to ask you?
I don't know. I'm sure there is, but I'm sure we'll have time to talk again soon.
I think I wrote down about 3 podcasts worth of rabbit trails we can go chase later.
Definitely.
All right. Well, Jason, I sure appreciate your time and thanks for joining me today.
Yep. Thank you so much for what you're doing. I love what you're doing, putting yourself out there and helping get this communication out to some people that really need to hear it.
Well, thanks for that. We're going to try to keep doing the best that we can to keep content coming out every week.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right, gang. Have a great week.
Yep, you too.